Okay, so you know that feeling, right? When the day is over and you're just wiped out.
Hmm.
Like you just ran a marathon, but you can't really say what you got done. You know what I
Oh,
mean?
yeah, totally. And then those big goals you have, the important ones, they're always just hanging out on tomorrow's to-do list. It's like busy has just become the default setting these days.
It really has. And it's not just about not getting things done. It's more than that. It's like this constant weight of too much to do, feeling like you're always running out of time.
Yeah,
And that takes its toll for sure.
definitely. You're trying to make progress, but being busy all the time can leave you feeling drained, even like you're on the edge of burnout.
Exactly. And usually the advice is all about getting better at managing time. But from what we've been looking into, it seems like there's more to it than that. Like the real secret to feeling more fulfilled and getting more done might be less about squeezing more into your day and more about how three things work together: your time, your energy, and what you decide is most important.
That's it. And we've been digging into Carey Nieuwhof's book, At Your Best. He wrote it after going through burnout himself. And his main point is that when those three things, time, energy, and priorities, are all working together, that's when you really start to thrive, not just survive.
So that's what we're focusing on today in this deep dive. We want to figure out how to actually make those three elements work together. How to break out of that cycle of stress and overwhelm and get into what Newhoff calls the thrive cycle.
Maybe a good place to start is with the author's own story. It helps to understand these ideas.
Yeah, so picture this. It's 2006, and Carey Nieuwhof is in his late 30s. His organization is growing like crazy, doing even better than he thought it would. He's happily married with two healthy sons. It seems like he's really made it right.
Yeah, from the outside, it definitely looks that way. But underneath that success, he was dealing with a lot of pressure at work. The demands on his time and energy were just too much. He said it himself. And this constant pressure was affecting his health and his family. He was stuck in this exhausting cycle of stress.
He even talks about dreaming of just leaving everything behind and finding a hammock in Fiji. That shows you how desperate he was feeling. But instead of doing that, he started looking for a better way to live and work. And that's how he discovered these three key assets, as he calls them, for building the life he really wanted.
And what's interesting is that it wasn't just about using his minutes and hours better. He noticed that people who were really thriving had figured out how to use their energy well and stay focused on what was most important. They made all three elements work together. And as he started to align his own time, energy, and priorities, the burnout faded away and he began to feel better in every part of his life, physically, emotionally, and in his relationships.
And those three key assets, like we've mentioned, are focus, time, leveraged energy, and clear priorities. Let's start with focus time. Newhoff says that a big reason we always feel like we don't have enough time is because we can't really focus the time we do have.
That's a huge point. We tend to think that every hour of the day is the same, but that's just not true. We get interrupted all the time by little things that pull our attention away and stop us from working on what really matters.
Right. It's like you look at the clock at the end of the day and think, where did the time go? And you haven't even touched those really important things you were supposed to do.
Mm,
And that's where the second asset energy comes in.
you got it. We all know that time is limited, but we often forget that our energy goes up and down throughout the day. If we don't understand and use our own personal energy cycles, we might end up wasting our most productive hours on things that don't actually need that much brain power. And then we're exhausted when we need to focus on the really important stuff.
I know exactly what you mean, like those afternoons when you're staring at the computer trying to focus, but your brain feels like it's moving in slow motion. It's a real struggle.
Totally. And Nieuwhof uses this interesting example. He talks about research on anesthesiologists. Studies have shown that the chance of something going wrong actually increases as their workday goes on. This suggests that even in jobs where being precise is super important, changes in energy levels make a big difference in how well people perform.
That's a serious thing to think about, especially when you consider how demanding a lot of jobs are. So to help us understand this better, Newhoff introduces this idea of energy zones. He talks about the green zone, which is that window of about 3 to 5 hours a day when you're at your best.
Mhm.
Really focused, productive, and feeling good.
The important thing is that a lot of times we waste that prime time, our green zone, on routine meetings, answering emails, things that need to get done, but maybe not when we're at our peak. Things that don't really need us to be thinking at our highest level.
Yeah, it's almost sad to think about all that potential being used on things that could probably be done at other times.
Yeah.
Then he talks about the yellow zone, which is when you're not at your absolute best, but you can still get good work done.
The yellow zone is still valuable. You can accomplish a lot there.
Hmm.
Just not the things that need you to be super focused. It's more of a medium energy level.
And then there's the red zone, which I think we're all pretty familiar with. That's the part of the day when your energy is low, you feel sluggish, and just trying to focus feels impossible.
Right. Even easy tasks can feel hard then. So what you can do is start paying attention to your own energy rhythms. Over the next few days or even weeks, try to notice when you feel the most energetic and focused. That's probably your green zone. And also pay attention to when you feel a big drop in energy. Maybe you feel like taking a nap. That's probably your red zone.
So it's about making your own personal energy map, figuring out when those green, yellow, and red periods happen in your day. And it's important to remember, as Nieuwhof says, your green zone hours might not always be all at once. He says his most productive time is in the morning, and then he gets another burst of energy in the early afternoon.
Exactly. And don't worry about being super precise. Energy levels can change depending on different things. The goal is to get a general idea of your natural energy flow. And one more thing. Don't try to force your green zone to last longer than it naturally does. 3 to 5 hours of peak focus is normal, and it's enough time to get a lot done on your most important work.
Okay, so we're starting to figure out our energy zones. Now, how do we actually use this knowledge? This brings us to the idea of using our energy strategically by matching our tasks to our different energy levels.
The main idea here is simple but really effective. Do your best work when you're at your best during your green zone. Nieuwhof says that thriving depends on using that valuable green zone time for the things that really make a difference. He divides these tasks into three main areas: your gifts, your passion, and your impact.
Let's talk about those gifts, or the things that come easily to you that other people find hard. Your unique talents and skills. Nieuwhof uses himself as an example. He's really comfortable speaking in front of big crowds, which a lot of people find really scary. Think about the things you've been reading about. What stands out to you that might be harder for someone else? That could be a potential gift to develop in your green zone.
But it's not just about recognizing those abilities. The green zone is also the perfect time to actively develop those gifts. Use that focused time to get better at your skills, learn new things, and practice intentionally.
Then there's passion, the things you genuinely enjoy and that motivate you. You're probably passionate about things you're good at, but it can be other things too. These are the activities that actually give you energy instead of draining you. Things you find rewarding or even essential for your well-being. This could be hobbies or spending quality time with people you care about. What are you excited about in the stuff you've been reading? Maybe spending some green zone time exploring those things more would be a good idea.
And lastly, impact. This means using your green zone time on the tasks that get the biggest results. These are usually your main responsibilities, the things that add the most value to your work or help you reach those big life goals. Like writing a book, as Nieuwhof did. He wants you to think about the question, what am I really trying to achieve in my life? And then use your green zone to make real progress on those things.
That makes sense. Tackle the most important energy-intensive tasks when you have the most mental energy. So what kinds of tasks should we be doing in our yellow zones?
Once you've taken care of those high-impact activities during your green zone, the yellow zones are great for tasks that are moderately important or need a medium level of energy, like going to meetings, answering less urgent emails. Things that are important for working together and communicating, but don't need you to be at your absolute sharpest.
And what about the red zones? How can we use those low energy times well?
Your red zones are best for your less important, more routine tasks, like catching up on emails that aren't urgent, doing paperwork, or even exercising if that's something you find relaxing and that doesn't take a lot of mental effort.
Importantly, Nieuwhof tells us what not to do during your red zone. He says don't make big decisions or have difficult conversations like trying to resolve conflicts when your energy and focus are low.
Exactly. So now you can try mapping out your own tasks and goals and start putting them into these three zones. What absolutely needs to get done in your green zone because it matches your priorities, uses your gifts, and keeps you motivated? What can you comfortably handle in the yellow zones? And how can you make the most of those low energy red zone hours?
It's amazing how much more intentional we can be with our time and energy
Yeah.
once we start thinking about our day this way. Now let's talk about that third important asset: priorities. We can have all the time in the world and perfectly managed energy levels, but if we're not focused on the right things, it doesn't really matter.
That's so true. Nieuwhof gives this really relatable example. You sit down at your desk, and for once your schedule is actually open. You think, great, finally I can work on that big project.
I know that feeling, the excitement of a fresh start, ready to get things done.
But then the interruptions start. A coworker needs just a quick question, which of course takes longer than a few minutes. Your inbox starts blowing up with urgent emails, and then suddenly you have an unexpected meeting. By the time you can finally get back to the task you wanted to do, the day is almost over and you haven't actually made any progress on that important project.
It's so frustrating. You've been busy all day, but you haven't moved forward on your own goals. So what's the real problem here?
The problem is that your priorities got hijacked by distractions and things that weren't really that important. You spent the whole day reacting to other people's demands instead of proactively working on what truly matters. These things that seem urgent but aren't actually that important can eat up your valuable time if you let them.
And these days, with all the technology we have, distractions are everywhere. Right? Nieuwhof even mentions a study that found that the average person interacts with their smartphone over 2,600 times a day.
Yeah.
It's no wonder it's hard to stay focused.
Yeah, our attention is constantly being pulled in different directions. So minimizing distractions is super important. Turning off notifications you don't need is a big one. And he also talks about how important it is to have the right environment for focused work, a comfortable space where you won't be distracted, your own little ecosystem that helps you thrive.
Of course, there will always be things that are genuinely urgent and important and need our attention right away, like an important request from your boss or getting ready for a big presentation. But the key, like Nieuwhof says, is to figure out which tasks are the right ones to prioritize in your green zone. What are the most important things you need to get done during that time?
And this is where the Pareto principle comes in handy. It's also called the 80-20 rule. The Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto noticed that a lot of times, 20% of your effort gets you 80% of your results. Nieuwhof realized that in his own work, a few core priorities like creating great content and having a positive work environment were the main things that made his organization successful. What about you? What 20% of the information or actions from your work will give you 80% of the understanding or results you're looking for?
It's about finding those high-impact activities, the ones that give you the most bang for your buck in terms of making progress towards your goals.
Exactly. And he specifically points out important but non-urgent activities. These are the things that contribute to your long-term goals and have a big overall impact, but they're often the easiest to put off because it doesn't seem like there are immediate consequences if you don't do them. But Nieuwhof emphasizes that consistently making time for these priorities pays off big time in the long run.
This is such a good point. It's so easy to get caught up in the urgent stuff and forget about the truly important tasks that help us succeed in the long term. Okay, so we've talked about aligning our time and energy. Now let's get into another crucial part of effective prioritization, managing our relationships and learning when and how to say no to requests.
That can be tricky. Nieuwhof tells this relatable story about his grandmother and her friend Nancy. Nancy would call every day and they would talk for hours. His grandmother had trouble politely ending those calls, and sometimes she would even ask him to help her find a way to get off the phone.
It just shows how many of us find it hard to set boundaries with our time, especially when it involves other people.
The main takeaway here is that the people who demand the most of your time aren't always the ones who deserve it most. At work, this might be coworkers who don't perform well or those who love to stir up drama. Meanwhile, the people who really deserve your time and attention, your top-performing colleagues, the ones who energize you, your close friends and family, they often don't make as many demands.
He brings the Pareto principle back here too, right? He suggests we spend about 80% of our time with the top 20% of people who add the most value and positive energy to our lives.
Exactly. If you don't consciously decide who you spend your time and energy with, other people will end up making those decisions for you. And Nieuwhof mentions Dunbar's number, which is the idea that there's a limit to how many stable social relationships we can have. This connects to the broader idea of cognitive load. Our brains can only handle so many meaningful connections.
Right. The idea of those concentric circles of relationships. A small inner circle of really close friends, a slightly larger group of good friends, and then a wider network of acquaintances. It shows that we can only have so many deep, meaningful relationships.
Recognizing that limit is important. It shows us that we need to be careful about where we invest our energy in relationships. And because we can't avoid getting requests for our time, it's important to have a clear plan for saying no. Without it, we often end up saying yes, even when it makes us feel overwhelmed.
So what are some good ways to say no politely but firmly?
Nieuwhof has some helpful advice. First, start by saying you're willing in principle, like, I appreciate you thinking of me, or I'd love to help if I could. Then say you understand, but you're not able to do it right now, and be clear and firm about it. If it makes sense, you can suggest someone else or another resource that might be able to help. And finally, thank them for considering you. The key is to set boundaries respectfully.
Those are really useful tips. So we've covered aligning our time, energy, and priorities. But how do we keep this Thrive cycle going in the long run? Life always throws curveballs our way.
That's for sure. Nieuwhof compares it to a well-maintained car that can drive a lot of miles. The key is preventative maintenance. Stress and change are part of life, so we need to have ways to stop ourselves from falling back into that stress spiral.
What are some of the important maintenance strategies the Nieuwhof recommends?
One important strategy is to schedule all your priorities ahead of time, and that includes time for family and personal life. Nieuwhof points out that an empty space on your calendar can actually be a problem. It can leave you to say yes to less important things just because you think you're available. He gives an example of saying yes to a Saturday barbecue just because he didn't have anything else planned. The idea is to aim for consistent progress, knowing that perfection isn't possible. Things won't always go exactly as planned, and that's okay.
Some people might be worried about this, especially if they feel like they don't have much control over their schedules,
Hmm.
like people in really demanding jobs.
Nieuwhof acknowledges that some jobs just don't offer a lot of flexibility with work hours.
Huh?
But even with a regular 40-hour work week, you still have a lot of time, 128 hours to be exact. That's all yours. It's about figuring out where you do have control and applying these principles as best you can within those limits.
And he also talks about how different stages of life can affect how much we can handle. When you have a new baby, or you're taking care of elderly parents or dealing with health problems, you might need to adjust your approach. It might not be the best time to start big new projects.
Right. There will be times when you need to adjust your expectations and just focus on getting through the current demands. And if you ever feel like you're losing track and falling back into old habits, Nieuwhof recommends tracking how you're spending your time again. Have your energy zones changed? What activities are constantly taking up your time without giving you much back? Have your priorities shifted? It's about embracing change and being willing to adjust your strategies as needed.
This idea of constantly checking in with yourself seems really important for staying effective in the long term. Now, Nieuwhof also gives some final practical advice in the form of categorical decisions. What's the idea behind that?
The main idea behind categorical decisions is that by making one big decision, you can get rid of the need to make a bunch of smaller decisions. This saves you valuable time and mental energy in the long run. Think of it like creating automatic yeses or automatic nos for certain types of requests or activities.
Can you give some examples of how that might work?
Sure. At work, you might decide to only have team meetings at certain points in a project. This would automatically reduce the amount of time you spend in meetings. Or you might choose to only work with clients in a specific industry. In your personal life, you could pick a few charities to support every year. This way, you don't have to think about every single donation request that comes your way.
So it's about setting clear boundaries and guidelines to make decisions faster and protect your time and energy.
Exactly. Once you've set up these categories, the key is to stick to them and only make exceptions when absolutely necessary. This makes things more predictable and frees up your mental energy for the things that really matter.
This has been a really insightful deep dive into Nieuwhof's framework. It goes way beyond just basic time management techniques. It's about this bigger idea of aligning our time, energy, and priorities.
Definitely. Breaking free from that constant feeling of stress and being overwhelmed is possible. You can do it by understanding and working with your natural energy cycles, focusing your time on your most important goals, and protecting your priorities.
As you think about what we've discussed today, think about one categorical decision you could make in your own work or personal life this week to get back some of your valuable time and energy. What boundaries could you set to better align your time, energy, and priorities going forward?
And maybe take a moment to think about your green zone. What's one specific thing you can commit to doing tomorrow during that high energy time to make the most of it? It's about taking those small intentional steps toward consistently being your best self.